Alright, welcome to Art with Ian. Today we are talking about book cover design. Actually, for this particular episode, we're just going to talk about the design basics, Design 101. And then if you guys actually want more videos about book cover design, I can go deeper into specific topics around that. So let me know in the comments after this video if you want more of this kind of a thing. This is actually what I do for a living. I'm a freelance cover designer and illustrator. Specifically, I want to talk about cover design or design basics from the perspective of illustrators, because that's what I started out as. That's what I am at the core. I'm a painter, and it took me some time to push myself from thinking about design as an illustrator to thinking about design as a designer, and that's a really important transition you're going to have to make if you want to get into things like cover design or poster design or anything in the design world. So first thing I want to talk about is the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds basically is important because it's how we think about breaking up our canvas. So rule of thirds. Let's look over here at this cover that I did. I painted this as a mock-up cover to talk about for this video. So the rule of thirds grid basically works like this. And I'm sure if you have been in the art world for any amount of time, you probably have at least heard about this. But it's a compositional rule of thumb, as they say, where you kind of want to at least be thinking about it. You don't have to adhere to it in like a slavish kind of a way. But if you look here, you can kind of see that I put my most interesting things near these intersections of the thirds. I also made sure my title was taking up the compositional space of an entire third of the canvas. And that's a really important thing in book cover design, especially this day and age where most people anyways, who buy books are looking online and they're probably on their phone and they're looking at tiny little thumbnails. And if that title is not big and bold and high contrast, they're just going to scroll right past that book cover. Unless something else very oddly catches their eye. But as a basic rule, people scroll past books without titles that speak to them. So the title is the most important thing. So that's taking up an entire third, a little bit more actually weight than an entire third of the canvas. Also, you'll note that the main kind of point of interest, focal point of this ent creature is really close to this bottom third. Our highest points of contrast on the cover, for the most part, are right near this third over here. And then our protagonist character, whoever they are, is occupying this bottom quadrant here. And nothing is really quite just living right here, It's not like there's your point of interest and that creates a very boring canvas. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. The next one I want to talk about is leading the eye. Okay, so let's turn off our rule of thirds stuff. Okay, now what I mean by leading the eye is that people naturally have they're conditioned to look in certain directions or follow certain cues that you can manipulate with the way you create your compositions. In this case, the first thing you're going to do as a viewer, most likely, is go straight to the text, as we just discussed. So the title's at the top, and people, at least in English-speaking people, at least read left to right. So this is the eye path they're going to take. They're going to enter here at the big word. They're going to read the title, which goes down at an angle. They're going to come down to this point of interest here, which is the glowing light at the staff. That staff is down at an angle pointing at this tree, which is down at an angle, which then meets up with the leg of this big creature, which is also interesting. That's going to pull their eye back into the canvas, and they're going to immediately try and land here where there's high contrast and high interest. This is also pointing straight back. This creature points straight back at this, and so it's going to put you in a visual loop. This is a visual loop, basically. And that's what you want to try and accomplish, is you want to pull a viewer in, and you don't want to let them leave. You also don't want to piss them off by making it annoying. You know, so like areas of rest and things like that are important. You know, so, you know, use your, you know, kind of discretion around how hard you push this kind of a thing, but be thinking about how you pull your viewer in and how you retain them. Okay, so that is leading the eye. Next one I want to talk about is color palette and or color theory. Okay, so let's turn off the eye path here. Okay, so this is the color palette in swatches in a nutshell for this cover. And the really important takeaway here, I think there are a couple important takeaways here. Firstly, let's just look at the color picker here. In fact, I think I'm just going to take this out, and I think I'm just going to, whoa, that got oddly big. I wasn't trying to accomplish that, but we'll just go with that. Okay, as we go through these, watch where the color actually is living. Okay, so this really dark color is actually in a high saturation zone, but that's not that big of a deal because the darker you go, the less saturation impacts. And so when you're in a really dark zone, you do want high saturation if you don't want things to feel quite gray, right? So, but watch how most of these colors are going to stay left of this central zone. They're going to be on this side of the saturation, right? So here we go. That's barely to the right. That's to the left, 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 to the left. Oh, that one's to the right. Okay, this color right here, this is the color right here, inside here. The reason why I went high saturation with it is because I really, really want this to be interesting. And I want it to stand out and be actually kind of grabby for your eye. So I actually pushed the saturation on that. Now we'll talk in a second about why this saturation thing is important. Okay, to the left of the 50% mark, to the left, to the left, and to the left. So, put this back in here. The reason why this is a big deal is because the lower saturation you go, the more gray you introduce into a color. And the more gray you introduce, the more you create a common denominator. So if you want colors to harmonize, the more gray you add to them, the better chance they have of harmonizing no matter where on the color wheel they actually live. This is a really important thing to understand, and it's something that I could go into much more depth about. Color theory is a huge topic, but I'm going to leave it at that for now, and then just talk about choosing percentages of a color type or hue, to create visual kind of hierarchy, right? So let's look at the grouping in this palette. So here's the main colors of, what you see in the background, right? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swatches. Okay, the next group of colors, which is also in the cools and, you know, the bluish cools and lavender, is 1, 2, 3. That's the title. All the colors in the main part of the title are these three right here. Okay, the next group of swatches, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the ent creature and this branch. That's everything that is like wood and moss and, you know, in the image, basically. And then you have the blossoms up top and down here, which are also cool. Everything on here is, this whole palette is quite cool, which is what's making it feel like it's, you know, harmonious. But we have 1, 2. So notice how the amount of swatches are getting less as we go into these tertiary colors. And then the last color, which is the name of the author and these other little splashes up here with the and of the, is just 1. But it's very similar to one of the other colors that's around it, right? So it's very harmonious in that way. And so what we have is a hierarchy of blues. There's a lot of blues. Then you go into turquoise, and then you go into more green, and then you have a few purples, 1, 2, 3 purples and or lavenders, and then a couple greenish yellows. Like, they feel yellow against all this blue, but if you put them against actual yellow, they would feel green. And that's another thing about color theory that we can't go into depth for this particular video. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to talk about is contrast. Okay, contrast is a huge visual tool that we use to make viewers look where we want them to look and ignore things we want them to ignore, at least unless they stay in the piece for a long time. So the first thing that a viewer is going to see, as we discussed, is probably the realm, right? Realm, really. And you have this really light stroke color over the top of one of the darkest darks in the whole entire piece. Super high contrast. And then the next area of interest is this area we discussed on one of the the intersections of thirds. And you have a super bright bit of sky poking through against a fairly dark bit of tree silhouette. Then we move on to another point of interest, and we've got super bright glowing lights inside here against the dark of his hands holding it. And then you come down, and one more time, this point of interest is a little bit less pushed, and that's on purpose because I actually want this to be, I don't want this character standing here to be the most obvious and immediate thing that you feel in the cover. I actually want the creature and the title to pull you in. And then, oh, by the way, there's a character here. What are they doing? What's that about? It's like a second or third point of interest, which then recycles you back into the main points of interest. And so the contrast levels are not as high, but they're still quite high. And that is using contrast to get your viewer to look where you want them to look. It's a massive part of understanding design. You can use color, like contrast in color. You can use contrast in value, which is the most common. You can use contrast in shape. There's a lot of ways to actually put contrast into your image. And you'll notice that there are shape contrasts happening here too. You got the roundness of this thing in his hand against the pointiness of his fingers. You've got the roundness of the O here against long, pointy, kind of straight foliage. You have his cloak, his or her cloak. I haven't actually decided if this is a guy or a girl, but it's a person. You've got the pointiness of the cloak flowing here against the roundness of this and the roundness of all the blossoms around. So there's quite a bit of shape contrast happening, but it's definitely more of a value and a color contrast, and specifically value contrast is the biggest, most important thing going on here. So that's Design 101 in terms of how I think about book covers specifically. A lot of this transitions over into anything to do with design across the board. But book covers are a topic that I could definitely find myself enjoying talking about more because it's what I do actually for a living. I'm a freelance cover designer. So if this is something that interests you guys, if you want to know more, if you want to get more deep dive into specifics of genre, and just there's a lot to talk about involving cover design. So let me know in the comments if that's something you're interested in. Hope this helped you guys. If it did, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.